Are you ready to become a leader and change maker by getting your PhD? Ready to stop stressing and actually take action so you create offer letters instead of rejections? Then this is the spot for you. I'm Dr. Natalie Morse, and I'm here to help you get into your dream PhD with full funding. Let's go. Welcome to the podcast. I'm Dr. Natalie Morse, and I have Taylor Michael with us, who is going to really be a great resource to talk through what we're seeing right now in terms of this climate in applying to PhDs and really just the world in general with all of its uncertainty. I hear a lot of times from all of you how stressful it feels given the climate. And so I really want to dive into it and dissect it and offer you opportunities to move forward or make decisions that work for you. And we'll also hit some data on what we've seen in the past to try to ground what's happening, because I think that is helpful as we grapple with all the changes happening today. We'll let Taylor introduce themselves. Welcome.
Hi, I'm so excited to be here. I'm Taylor. I use they, them pronouns. I'm going into my third year of the PhD program in counseling psychology at Teachers College, Columbia University. So yeah, being at Columbia, there's been a lot of stress. I'm excited to talk more about it.
Okay, Columbia is in the news, right? And so obviously, Taylor and I are just giving our opinions and we're just looking through what's happening. We are in no way endorsing or doing anything of that nature. We are just talking through kind of things that we're seeing and giving our opinion. So again, there's so much uncertainty right now. Literally nobody knows what's going to happen. Not even like the dean of a school like Columbia or a congressperson. Everything is in flux. We're recording at the end of June 2025. So I guess let's just start high level, because, if you are applying to a PhD program or you're thinking about it, what are things that you're hearing from people like around this topic that like from a worry perspective?
Yeah, I think people are wondering, is it even worth it to apply right now? Like, should I just sort of wait out this wave of confusion and uncertainty? People are feeling like their chances are much lower than maybe they would be. They can't be honest about their research interests because they have to be really careful about what may or may not be funded. So I think, there's a lot of fear and uncertainty, and I think people really considering shifting their path because of this.
Mm-hmm. Okay, that's a great question. Is it worth it? That question, I think, is valid to ask in anything you're doing, right? Like, is this relationship worth it? Like, is this new job opportunity worth it? We're always going to be asking those questions. And that math is truly very individualistic. My math is going to be different than your math on what's worth it to me or not. So there is a lot of questions on your goals, your values, what you want of your life. And absolutely, you can have an amazing life with or without a PhD. Like, that's 100% true, right? If our goals are to be in certain spaces or to have certain opportunities, to be able to run research projects, to be able to be a PI, to be able to be licensed, in your case, in the psychology space, it is essentially required, right? Like, then it's like, is that really the goal that you want? And it's just like, if it's not, it's not. I kind of liken it to people who want to be actors, right? You can be a commercial actor and never be like in a feature film, or you can be in plays or on Broadway, which is obviously insanely competitive, or you could stay in your like local community theater. There's different levels. And if this is the level you want, then to me, it's worth it. But if you, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think, at least for me right now, I was really excited to pursue a PhD, and my goal is to become a professor and do research and also be a licensed psychologist who can see therapy clients. But I actually think now that everything's happening, my drive and motivation has increased exponentially, and that's true of many people that I know, particularly in this landscape where academic research and particularly DEI-focused research is being attacked. It almost feels like the work is more important than ever. I think in terms of kind of meaning and what you want out of your life, I think that's something to consider. I've heard people feeling like, if this wasn't my path before, it sure as hell feels like it is now.
Oh, this is fun. So I don't know if you know this, but I was in my PhD during Trump's first
Oh
administration.
boy.
And so, it was different, but like, and we had that same, I remember like our lab group of like 50, 20 people, and like most of us were feeling it. And most of us probably voted differently. We probably had different hopes than Trump being president. And I just remember feeling like a little bit angry, like a little bit like we're really doing this, and like, but I guess this is this is the truth, right? There are always bigger systems, and so we are trying to gain influence in different systems, and typically education is a great way to do that, right? Like degrees, credentials, whether they be in academic or military, right? Like if you're a sergeant or a colonel, you have more influence than a private, right? Like all these things are always true.
Mhm.
So that really pushed me of like, well, you can't take away from me my degree. Like,
Exactly.
no matter where I go, you have to call me doctor. So like, let's get this done.
And I think that's a good point, that we're all trying to do our thing within this larger system that is always oppressive in different ways. And right now it is in a particular way. I think it can be really unsettling to feel like you don't have control over your future. And I don't think there's any point where any of us really have any control of the larger, how things are going.
This hits on something, right? I'm a little older, so I'm an engineer. I really have how many years of education? 4 in undergrad, 2 in master's, 4 in PhD, 10. In engineering, it's very like there is a solution. There are black and white things. And I think at an individual level, that can set us up to try to engineer our lives like it's controllable. And it's funny, I talked to my doctor friends too, and same thing. So I have a friend who's a radiologist, and he has been through so much, like every 2 years, like his contract gets bought out or he has to transfer. And he's like, I didn't think it would be like this. Life is always spiking. And I think, especially in the last 20 years, right, it's gotten more spiky, and I think it will continue to do. So the ability to navigate that, roll with it, still create what you need to within all of that is really important. Obviously, some situations are harder than others, but I think the illusion of a steady state life is really appealing. It's like, I want a steady state life because it's easy, predictable, but I think it's an illusion. Even for those who like a radiologist who in your brain would be super steady state, right? Like they've got a good job, they did all the right things. Guess what? Spiky as hell.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess let's ground our discussion too. Like obviously the proposed budget for fiscal year 2026 is cutting a bunch of research. I literally opened that document. You need to see that PDF. Unless your line item is defense, so everything is cut across the board. So every industry is feeling it. And I think when we are in our bubble of like only seeing the articles directed at us and hearing other people talking about the things that we are in, it's like, oh my God, we are under attack. But literally every industry, unless you're like building tanks or whatever, is getting cut in this proposed budget. The biggest question I get is like, well, with these funding cuts, and you said it earlier, like, am I competitive? Will I get in? Should I wait it out?
Yeah, it's so hard. And I think I have a perspective on this and want to acknowledge that I was in a PhD program before this specific thing was happening. So I sort of have the privilege of looking back and thinking about what would I do, but I'm not in that position. There's never a perfect time. So I'm also, for listeners, I work with Fearless Grad, and I work with clients who are applying to PhD programs. And I think kind of regardless of the political situation, people are often kind of being strategic about like, maybe I'll apply to some PhD programs, some master's programs, some research roles. I think that strategy makes a lot of sense for the current time, as it does for any time.
Because even in the best of times,
Right.
the acceptance rate is 20% nationally. And obviously at individual competitive schools, it could be 5% or 6%,
Yeah.
That's really valid too. Like, it reminds me of studies that get posted like, bacon is bad for you, it gives you cancer. Your probability of cancer went from 0.04% to 0.045. Like, yes, we don't want to have more cancer, but like Yeah, your point is valid. It's always competitive and there's always opportunities to give yourself options. Like this is not the one and only option.
Right. And I remember you saying one time that we have no idea when this will end. Like, if it will end, God forbid, it's possible that waiting could generate like worse outcomes for years to come. I think we can't totally make all of our decisions about our life dreams based on what we think might happen because we don't know.
Yes. And so, yeah, because I think there's a good chunk of people who are going to be waiting and seeing
Yeah.
this cycle. And yeah, maybe next year is like exponentially better. Maybe it's exponentially worse. Like literally, we don't know. To me, it's like if you're well prepared and you're going to do the work, you might even have an edge this cycle because I could see less people applying, truthfully. Let's talk about the budget cuts. The proposed budget from the Trump administration for the next year cuts the whole federal budget by 23%. So again, everybody feeling it. And it literally touches every part of the U.S. because the U.S. government is the biggest client, right? So no matter what you do, you sell to the government largely in some different ways, right? So that exists. And then at the research level, I believe the NIH funding cut was around 40% proposed, and then the NSF was around like 55% proposed. So those are not small numbers. And that, of course, has huge impacts because let's just talk through the funding in a typical PhD, right? So when you get into a PhD in the US, they're typically all fully funded because they want you to invest your time and energy. They know that you're not going to do that if you're working 2 jobs and whatever. So it's very different than a master's in that way. So the stipend is coming from the school. So your tuition waiver is coming from the school. And typically that comes from the school's pot of central money. And they allocate that to different departments. Typically, obviously, you can get more or less if you have something specific in your department that you have external funding for. But that typically comes from the central school. So if schools overall are receiving less money, that's a problem. They can come from their undergrad tuition, their master's tuition, all the professional degrees that they house, special programs, sports, and then endowments. So that pot of money is relatively stable, but of course, ebbs and flows. And then your stipend typically comes from the department and or grants that particular department or PI got, and then they would pay you through that, or TA opportunities as well. So again, that's undergrads paying for a service that we are providing as PhD students. When those individual grants get smaller, the ability to fund PhD students or other workers on those opportunities gets smaller. It's not the only source of funding, though. So yes, it's a piece of the puzzle for sure. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, to be very honest, I don't totally know where all the money comes from at my school. I think that's important to note because as things have gotten more chaotic recently, no changes have been announced in terms of smaller cohort sizes or anything happening to existing stipends. Everybody has this feeling of anxiety and uncertainty. And right now, there's no real tangible thing happening that we can see.
That's crazy. I need to know more. So obviously, institutions are not going to go around making statements.
Right.
And to our earlier point, they just don't know enough information to make.
Exactly.
And so obviously, we just saw in the news that some of the NIH funding has been deemed illegal. So they've been rolling that back, right? So like more funds should become available. And we saw this with the NSF as well. Their budget proposed got sliced in half for the NSF GRFP, which is a very prominent fellowship for grad students. They ended up making about 50% less fellows this year than they typically do. However, we were just talking to another person on our team, and they were saying that, yes, that was true. And then a few months later, NSF released another 500 spots. So I think we're also going to see this, being conservative on the front end, and then maybe more being released later. So I think the typical timelines that we normally see in a PhD cycle might get elongated. And we saw that last cycle too, right? Like more offers were coming in like March and April than they had in the past. And we might even see it further. We might even see offers coming in June or July. So I do think, which is annoying, obviously, if you're trying to plan your life, but I do think that there yes, your point of like the uncertainty is so high and the stress level is so high, but like tangibly on the ground, have you heard of people at your school where their funding has been reduced, like current PhD students?
No.
And I know that other people you know are working on areas that have been cut, right? Like the DEI type things.
Mhm.
So if you have been working on that kind of work, how do you keep doing that if it's been cut?
Yeah. So I definitely have seen that, there are, like, I have a friend who was really excited to apply to this one huge grant to fund their dissertation. And that's one of the grants that doesn't exist anymore. So there are
Yeah.
things like that where like maybe future plans are sort of interrupted. But yeah, currently, like, we all have the same stipend, tuition remission that we did before. I think I'm maybe in a unique position in counseling psychology versus other fields that a lot of the research that I do doesn't cost a ton of money, especially as a qualitative researcher. I'm often like interviewing people, paying them for their time and energy, and that's kind of all I need money for. So I think that also is a privilege right now to be able to do research for not a ton of money. I actually just got a study funded a couple weeks ago exploring trans older adult experiences of romantic and sexual intimacy, like a very DEI topic. And yeah, it was a kind of a strange experience to see that funded at a time like this, but I think it shows that that's still a thing. Like, this work is still happening, and it wasn't obviously funded by a government program, but there are other sources that are really valuable and still there.
Could you share the organization that this funding came through?
Yeah, so this was actually through the my school's like dean's office, like the
Got it.
student research.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. This is great. So that kind of goes back to that central pool of money that
Yeah.
schools have and that they do have the ability to use. And that's awesome. A really surreal moment, I'm sure, like you said. The news is like everything is on fire. And we want to be concerned. We don't want to
Right,
put our head in the sand. There are still opportunities. Research is always risky and it is always at the mercy. Back in the day, I think it was like 1995 or something like that, they halted all funding on stem cell research. And obviously we have done tons of that since then, right? So like we are always going to hit roadblocks at certain points for certain things. And then typically we can move past them, especially for a PhD and things. We do have a limited window, right? Like we have to get stuff done in order to graduate, get papers out. And so you have to be strategic. And if your research focus does need to shift through those 4 years, that's okay.
Yeah.
Doesn't mean in the next 5 to 20 to 30 years, you're not going to continue in that space.
Mhm.
The PhD is to give you the skills to conduct research. Where you focus, that's always going to evolve through time.
Yeah. I think I'm working on my dissertation proposal right now, and often the dissertation feels like the end, like final, the wrap up. But there was a professor who said recently, like, no, this is literally the beginning. Like, this is like the tiniest blip on your very long career, which can evolve however makes sense for you. So I think that's such a good point that, of course you want to be doing things that you're excited about in a PhD, and
Yes.
there's room for so much more later.
It's kind of like giving you the keys.
Right.
I'm so glad that that is there because I guess truthfully from my experience, I'm such an impatient person.
Mhm.
It's weird. Like I'm a planner, but sometimes I get myopic and I'm like, if it's not when I want it, F it, which is terrible. Like clearly I can move through that, right? Like I did 4 years of a PhD, which had a ton of ups and downs. So like, I didn't just throw my hands up and was like, F it. But I get that feeling too of like, I've worked so hard, pushing so hard. I guess if this is helpful to others, so someone who's in their current PhD going through it, just to continue that perspective even further upfront in terms of starting your PhD with that perspective, I think would be so helpful. So that way you're not tossed in the wind as much as you're like moving forward with intention, knowing that it's not a straight line.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Oh, definitely not. Okay, so we have a psychology person here, and I am not. Let's talk about how people typically deal with uncertainty or stress. Like, what are the typical responses? And then what kind of results do those create? If you were like, in an ideal world, if you could say what we know from psychology, like what are better skills or techniques or things that would help people to create better outcomes, right? Because we see this in the stock market. And when it dips, people pull all their money out. And that's a terrible idea because then you end up losing a shit ton of money versus if you had just left it in. But human nature is pull that money out. So could you share a little bit about those processes in this regard?
Yeah. And I'm not an expert. I'm just one therapist
Right.
putting that out there. What I end up talking about with people is uncertainty. And like, that's, I think, one of the hardest things to sit with. It's hard to feel grounded in that. I think like knowing what's going on and being able to feeling like we can predict the future really allows us to take a deep breath. But when that's not possible, it can feel so kind of like frantic and out of control. And I think there's like two pieces here. As we've been saying, first is that like a lot of these fears are very warranted and totally make sense. Like, this is things are wild right now. It makes sense to be asking yourself questions about like, should I be applying to PhD programs and what might this look like for me? And it's kind of like the dialectical behavior therapy, like taking two opposing things that feel opposing and holding them at the same time. So there's very real fear. And I think we have to ask ourselves, like, is our response useful? And like, I think part of it can be, this is valid. And I don't like feeling this way is not really helping me right now. And maybe there are some things happening in my head, some sort of stories I'm telling myself about what's going on right now that aren't necessarily true. So of course, like validating everybody and how they're feeling. And also thinking through, like, do I really need to kind of like throw away my entire life plan right now and like shift in a very different direction? Or can I just kind of sit with this, that it's hard and that it can be both difficult and like very scary in a real way. And,
What are some things that you see, and maybe not even this PhD, but let's say, obviously, uncertainty, change, stress is part of the human experience. So we experience that a million different ways, a million different times. What are some things that get people into trouble or lead to bad or less optimal results than they're looking for that you see, like people, so people can kind of start to see like, okay, am I making these very common mistakes? Or what are things that you see?
I think the biggest one that a lot of people, including me, struggle with and can make things a lot harder is black and white thinking. Is thinking like, okay, either it's the perfect time to apply to a PhD program or it's the end of the world and it's never going to work. I think finding that middle ground, that can be a really hard thing to find when things are blowing up in the air.
That's 100%. All or nothing thinking. I had a different coach a few years ago who I worked on that with her a lot. And this, we'll just try to walk through it. To your point, perfect time or it's all going to hell. The absolute worst time. And somewhere in the middle. And so something I think like a good grounding thought would be, there's a couple things. A, I'm already living my worst reality right now, which is I'm not in a PhD program. And if you look around, your house hasn't caved in, you're not on your deathbed today, right? Like life is what you make it. So it's either very good because you love your life or it's really bad because you don't love your, right? Like that is your life and it will be your life for the next XYZ unless you do anything different. That's a cool thought, right? Like if I don't get in, I'm exactly like, I'm already here. Nothing terrible happens to you if you don't get the result you want. And then the other thought would be like, I have amazing skills, values, connections, career opportunities. Like I'm building right now, no matter what, right? Like even if I don't get in this cycle, I'm still continuing to progress my career and my life because I'm being proactive, because I'm not sitting on my hands, putting all my eggs in this basket and like everything else is, garbage, right? Like, so I like to, this is how I did my PhD too, is like, I kept a lot of balls in motion, knowing that some of them will fail. So it's okay. It may take you a few cycles or maybe it doesn't work. You doing this as well as continuing to progress your other career over here doesn't mean that you're not all in on your PhD. They've actually proven this like Oh, the fallacy of like this American dream of like drop out, cash in all your money and put it all into like Mark Zuckerberg.
Yeah.
He did not drop out of Harvard, mother effers. He took a leave of absence because he was smart in going, I think this could be a great thing. I also want to protect my other career opportunities. And they have proven that, because that takes away some of the stress of your brain of all or nothing, right? Your brain goes, great, I'm going to give this a lot of my energy and effort. And if it doesn't work, I also have other things going on. I think that is a really safer place for my brain to be than like cashing in all my chips. I think that's a fallacy that we invent on the back end to give these people great stories for movies. So I think some people think if they're not all 100% in, that they're not going to have success or they're not committed. And I also don't think that that's true.
Absolutely. And I'm glad that I think it's important as we're having this conversation to talk about like, what is that end goal that everybody's scared of, not getting in? So what does that mean? As you were talking, I was thinking about, I applied one time to PhD program, didn't get in. So the second time is when I got in. And the first time, looking back, I was all or nothing thinking like to the max. Unfortunately, I would not recommend providing this response to an interview question, but a faculty asked me, okay, so what do you think, what would you do if you didn't get into PhD programs this cycle? And I unfortunately said, I don't know, maybe I'll die.
Oh, Taylor.
I sure did.
No.
But I really, like, that's how it felt. I either get in and my life begins, or I don't, and like everything's over and I'm a total loser. And I didn't get in, and that's not what happened. But yeah, so I think like that energy, the all or nothing thing, like that created just not a good situation for me the first time around. And that's what I really had to like work on for the second time, was figuring out a different way to approach.
Oh, this is so good. It's almost like a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? Like you attract what you're putting out, and you're putting out this like desperate, have to, all or nothing. And they are like, I don't want someone like that on my team.
No.
Like they're going to burn out or they're going to be horrible to work with. You hit on a good thing. Like this process of applying is a process. And if you use it well, can strengthen you, can help you work through these things so you are more successful. So like you took the time, obviously in many different ways and avenues to do that. And I think your energy was so different the second round and really drew people to you. So if we see some kind of common problems and like some kind of ways to work through that by acknowledging it, acknowledging reality of like worst case scenario, and then is this serving you? And then what are some things people can do as they're because of course this isn't a one and done. It's a thought pattern that we should choose to shift, in my opinion. But what are some ways people can acknowledge, like do that with themselves or even with others?
Yeah, well, being in therapy during the application process, because I do think there's something about this really intense process that kind of tests you in every way and can sometimes be really difficult in terms of self-esteem. And I think having someone who's there with you, kind of helping you ground throughout, I think that's amazing. But I think too, even just for two things that come to mind. The first is like reality testing. So as you said, like the thoughts will probably continue to come up of like, you know, I'll never get in this round and this is a terrible time and why am I doing this? So then I think pausing and thinking like, okay, maybe that's true. Let's test it out. Like, what do I know about the facts of what's going on right now? And then I can decide, like, do I want to listen to that thought, or do I just kind of want to let it be there, but not put all my stock into it? And yeah, I think that's something you have to kind of do over and over again. It's a muscle that you build. But I think a lot of what we've been talking about today is like anxiety and fear. I think the types of coping that we do that's helpful for anxiety and fear is grounding. So like trying to ground yourself any way you possibly can, whether that's like, you know, PhD applications are difficult and they're out of my control, but what's going on like in my family? Like, do I have a really sweet pet who make me feel grounded? Or like, do I have a partner who I can come home to and have a meal with? So I think anywhere you can find grounding in your life.
Hard to do your best work if you're overly anxious. And so whatever you can do to cut down on that, therapy, coaching, working with people like us,
Yes.
friends, family, exactly. Grounding yourself in reality and in what works for you makes a lot of sense. I appreciate that. In the spirit of grounding and reality, I want to talk a little bit about data because I think, to your point, there's lots of things out there and we don't have a ton of data. Like, I wish I could tell you exactly what the budget will be and how many spots will be open and everything like that. That is literally in flux. And in every cycle, it's in flux because there's always new grants coming out, new funding sources, or faculty leaving, or new faculty coming, or XYZ. Again, outside of your control, right? When I got recruited to do my master's, I got there and my faculty left for sabbatical in Australia. Conveniently did not tell me that when he was recruiting me. Same thing, like if you're applying to a program and you're super excited to work with this faculty, maybe they're going to Australia next month and you have no idea, right? Like, that has nothing to do with you, but your ability to control yourself, your emotions, your energy, how you market yourself, how you show up, that's what you can control, and that's what matters in terms of getting offers. I have two pieces of data. The Council of Graduate Schools, and every year they send out surveys to all the universities and collect data on who applied and how admissions went and stuff. It's not the most granular report, but it's the best data that we have. So what I want to ground us in from comparing COVID, right? Because that was the same time of uncertainty and the world is on fire and I will never get in and everything is ending. How quickly we forget, but this cycle is going to keep repeating. So I think this episode will be valid today, it'll be valid a year from now, and so on. So let's compare 2021 to 2023 admissions, because things were pretty steady at 2023. But 2021, they were making decisions on that in March. So like, it was still very crazy at that point. And so in 2021, we had just over 770,000 PhD applications. And in 2023, we had just over 817,000. So you can see that slightly less people applied in 2021, probably out of this fear, whatever, about 6% less. And then let's think about the acceptance rate. So from 2021, the acceptance rate was 20%, and in 2023, the acceptance rate was 21%. So not wildly different. We can see this report doesn't let us get into the nitty gritty at PhD versus master's, but I can also show you US resident versus temporary resident. So the green bar is total new enrollees. This is both master's and PhD. You can see that it stays pretty steady, but in 2021, we definitely had a dip. So a slight 10% enrollment dip, which you would expect because COVID was crazy. But you could also see that from the temporary resident change, right, we had a larger dip, like a 20% drop in 2020, probably because you were not allowed to travel and things like that to physically start your program. You can see that it came back up. Things do rebound. I just want to remind you that this is master's and PhD together. There are going to be dips over time, but typically they do come back. And so we expect a similar thing here. We expect some dips, and then we expect things to come back. Stopping your application process because of uncertainty is kind of like pulling your money out of the stock market because of uncertainty. It's probably going to hurt you because you're not taking the actions you need. And then the people who leave their money in, or the people who really apply well, get in because of less competition too. So I think that there's a benefit to just seeing opportunities.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that graph made me think about, you talked about temporary residence. I'm thinking too about how this can feel like a different ballgame for international students right now too, that they have even more kind of going on and more very valid fear. That there are folks in my program who are international students who feel like they can't travel home. So I think that's another piece of this puzzle too. It's scary for everyone and we're all in different positions. So as you said, like we all have to make our own kind of cost benefit analysis and, what makes sense for me and how can I like pursue my dreams and be safe too. Yeah.
Yep. There's great PhD programs outside of the US, right? There's so many opportunities. There's the EU, the UK, Canada, Australia. great opportunities. So I guess the whole world feels scary, right? Because everybody is kind of grappling with like, how will the economy be and whatever. I guarantee if you talk to a student in the UK, they would say the same thing. Like, oh, this is the worst time. And I would not put all my eggs in one basket. I would definitely be diversifying, just like the stock market. Wrapping up, in a nutshell, if people are asking, what should I do? Should I apply this cycle? What are your thoughts?
If this is something that's really important to you, and if this feels like the right time for you, kind of outside of the global political situation, I think, yeah, apply this cycle. It's also important to remember that it's very common in many fields to apply multiple times. You're throwing your hat in the ring this year, and if it doesn't work out, you go again next year. Probably half of the people I know in my program have applied multiple cycles, and they're all very smart and amazing people. So I would say apply.
I deal with a lot of super analytical, hyper overachievers. And so they are trying to reason it out so hard. They're like, well, the probability is 10% lower, da 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 da. And that could be true. I can tell you the probability is 0 if you don't apply. The probability of next cycle is still up in the air. It doesn't mean it'll be easier, better, worse. We have no idea. So control what you can control, run your best race. I think you should definitely talk to people, figure out what's going on at those particular programs, so that way you make your best decision, you know, because like Taylor was saying, you know, the news looks crazy and they're at Columbia, which is obviously in the news, and haven't seen big changes or really any tangible changes at this point. So if we were making decisions based off of people talking or the news, or people just in your ear, you would make very different decisions than what you were based on what's like you're actually seeing. And so that's why I say talk to people at the programs, admins, faculty, students, whoever you can talk to, that is what matters. What's really happening and what you're going to be experiencing in that situation versus what your best friend's mom's sister tells you. Because that's not real.
Yeah. And I think when I think about talking to people, I think people want to connect and build relationships. So I think that's also potentially helpful as you're networking. It feels like academia, because we all feel a little bit attacked right now, there's more of a community feeling, and there's more of like, yeah, I want to connect, I want to talk. So that could also potentially be in your favor as you're trying to build relationships and see what's going on.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Taylor.
Thank you.